Our secular age and how it's affecting congregations. One of the things we've experienced is declining attendance and membership, and congregations are not as strong as they used to be. And we're especially disappointed in that the fact that youth and young families are not as involved as they used to be, and that's the biggest drop-off. And our ministry in congregations is increasingly a ministry to seniors. And the secular culture, the youth and the young families especially are responding to the calls from the secular culture. I ran across a saying somewhere along the line in my ministry. Somebody famous said it, whose name I can't remember, but it goes like this: the voice of our neighbor sounds louder in our ears than the voice of God. And the younger generation is really attuned to listening to the voice of the culture, which elevates the immanent above the transcendent. Dr. Charles Taylor is a famous Canadian who talks about the secular age, and he's has a very academic and detailed way of looking at this, how the modern age started and, well, really picked up steam in the 17th and 18th century and has accelerated to our time. And one of the earmarks of the secular culture is that it places a high degree of value on the immanent, that is, what we can see, hear, feel, taste, and touch, and a very low value on transcendence, the things that go beyond what we can sense and which relate to the world and spiritual forces that are outside of ourselves, and we'll talk about more about that later. Oh yeah, and he talks about the emergence of Bobos. My generation is a Bobo generation. Bobo stands for bourgeois, and I forget the other word encapsulates what it means to live, giving full expression to your id, or your most primitive instincts. That's under the influence of Freud. Can you speak in the microphone? That's under the influence of Freud. Okay. So as the congregation experiences a lot of these factors of the effect of the secular culture, according to Andrew Root, one of the symptoms is a depressed congregation. We're sad about these things, and a depressed congregation finds it hard to gather the energy to do things differently to meet the changes that we're facing. Okay, that's a general outline of where we're going. So even if you are emerged in the immanent and in a secular culture, there is a need to tend to the self and what is authentically the self. And a lot of the younger generations especially, but all of us are committed to expressing the self, building an authentic self in the immanent. So if you eliminate the transcendent, what does that mean? The authentic self is expressed in material goods and in material expressions of the self. Okay. So these are the books which Andrew Root wrote, the ones that I read. I'm not an expert in everything he wrote, but I read all the faith formation in the secular age, the pastor in the secular age, and the congregation in the secular age. I was impressed by Dr. Root's credentials. He earned a PhD from Princeton, and he holds a permanent chair for youth and family ministry at the ELCA seminary in Minneapolis. I think it's Luther Seminary. And it was interesting to me that this fellow who holds a chair in youth and family ministry would write a prior book called The Death of Youth Ministry, or the end of youth ministry. And that is what he's seeing right across North America, and it happened a long time ago in Europe. Oh yes, the secular trends in culture are exhibited in North America and in Europe, not just in Canada, not just in Vancouver and BC, it's all over. And probably will not change in our lifetime. The reason I wanted to talk about his work is two of the impressions that I got out of this work, and he says it in print. This condition of trying to keep up with the secular culture will not change in our lifetime. It's not a matter of waiting until we're quit being scared of COVID and that people will come back. It probably won't happen. And we have to learn new ways of functioning. And the other thing is, it's not much use in blaming each other and saying, if only the congregation was more flexible and would invest more money in youth or music or this or that, then things would change. Or only if we had a minister who was more flexible and dynamic and younger and this and that, then things would change. Those aren't the major factors that are changing the nature of our ministry and some of the declines in which we are experiencing. It's the culture. Yes, this secular worldview has affected worship in declining attendances and membership. The religious identification of youth and young families. So one of the things, yeah, I know it's written back there, but my eyes are not good enough to read that. One of the things that Andrew emphasizes in his book is that the youth and young families, except for Generation Z, we'll talk about that later, but they're the first generation that has identified themselves on religious surveys as nuns, increasingly as nuns, no religion. Not even preferring Christian to denomination, they're preferring none to any religion at all. That's one of the phenomenons, okay, there you have it. Some of the statistics, and it's growing as time goes on. Okay, we've talked about older generations being distressed and congregations being distressed. Yes, the ways of engaging youth in the past no longer work. And, in my lifetime, in my ministry, decades ago, I guess, there was a large proliferation in youth pastors. Now there's a lot fewer of them. And it has to do with the declining number of youth. And someone has made the observation that in the latter half of the 20th century and the 21st century, the Christian church has invested a lot of money in trying to attract the youth. It's funding youth ministry and a lot of personnel too. They've invested in youth ministry, but have had a disappointing return on their investment. Dr. Root wrote a paper about Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I think most of us know about him. He's one of our Lutheran martyrs who, despite being safe in an American seminary during the Second World War, decided he'd had to go back to Germany and endure the Nazi takeover of Germany. and witness to the true Church of Jesus Christ, and started an alternate seminary, and ultimately he was executed by the Nazis. I didn't know that he was involved in youth ministry for a good part of his ministry in the beginning. And he was the one that said, and Dr. Root emphasizes this and quotes him, youth, he said, is not the future of the church. We often hear that. The youth is the future of the church. He said the youth is not the future of the church. The future of the church is Jesus Christ, and we can never forget that. So, that, yes. Oh, Weber and Freud have influenced secular culture and helped produce it. Our culture has led to the decline of church and church involvement. And in Church of Weber, he is the bourgeois side of Bobo. And Freud is the bohemian side, bohemian bourgeois. And that, well, you lived through the 60s and 70s. Most of you were, the saying was, if you feel good, do it. If it feels good, do it. That's the bohemian side. And the bourgeois side is, we're one of the wealthiest generations the world has ever seen. So we can afford to buy all these things that make us feel good and who identify who we are uniquely as a self. And this secular viewpoint, as I said before, promotes the immanent. Nothing exists beyond what we can sense, and it produces this search for authenticity in people and how they express themselves. People who are involved in the electronic media, what do they call that? These social things like TikTok and Twitter and all that. Social media, yeah. This is what they're searching for. They put themselves out there and they want feedback that get lots of likes and feedback on who they are and what they're doing, and they needed to get it out there. There's this search for authenticity. Oneself can only be discovered and expressed through collections of things and physical activities, and then you put it on social media and try and get that affirmed. Oh yes, and a big part of this is, guess who encourages this? Trying to express yourself through a collection of things and buying stuff. The corporations and the marketers. You deserve this. This is who you really are. Buy such and such a brand of car or makeup or whatever. Oh yes, and the bobos like me, the bourgeois bohemians, when we're raising our kids, we say, that's not so good. All this consumerism and encouraging their bohemian urges, their id. We need something to put limits on this. So we look to religion as a way of curbing excesses in our children and as a possible source of therapy. When things go off the rails, they'll have some principles and therapeutic principles to get them back online. So the God that we tend to view in the secular age is a God from whom we get things. It's kind of a deistic model. The deistic model is a watchmaker, God who created the world, who sets it in motion, but is not too much concerned about you and me as an individual. So we need to go back to that other slide. So he sums up the religious view in the secular culture as developing a moralistic, therapeutic deism. In the newest edition of the catechism that was put out by Concordia Publishing House, if you look up in the index, you'll find this: moralistic, therapeutic deism, which does not really require you to belong to a congregation or any religious group, because it's a deistic view of God. He got things moving, and he's not too concerned whether you go to church or whether you don't go to church, or whether you pray or don't go to pray. But if you can get something out of the group for your own therapy or moral development, then you associate, but not otherwise. Okay, now we can go. We've talked about that before, about congregations becoming discouraged by lower worship attendance and absence of children and young families and the aging demographics. One of the issues for us is, I'm not sure that we have really taken, or ministry to seniors has really something we've evolved into. I suspect we spend a lot of time grieving that younger people aren't there and trying to get them back, but we don't see the aging population and the ministry to seniors as a primary avenue of ministry. I wonder about that. Maybe that's one of the changes that has to happen as we transform to meet this new age. And if depression sets into a congregation and discouragement, one of the symptoms of that is low energy to do things. A lot of congregations are experiencing volunteer burnout. They say, as the numbers go down, you have the same amount of jobs to fill, and so instead of one person doing one job, now they're doing two. Instead of two people helping on one job, now there's only one. And volunteers tend to burn out, and sometimes they quit. Or else they'll go to a different congregation, a larger congregation that has a lot of people, and they don't have as much individual responsibility. That's one of the reasons we've seen the growth of these mega churches. The situation we're in requires hope and redirection and flexibility. And we have to admit that when we look back on church history and in the flexibility of our own response in our own congregations, Christian churches are notoriously flexible and optimistic about a transcendent and personal God. One of the things I'm struck with as I, talk to different congregations and experience it in the congregations I serve, the congregations have become very flexible as worship attendance and income has declined. I'm amazed at the solutions they come up for this in renting out the space to different people and working with different denominational groups, and increasing income from rentals is one of the ways, and I think that they've become very flexible. Maybe that's not a long-term solution, but in the short term, is it a very good solution? And Andrew ports us in directions for the future. He doesn't give us a recipe. To lift up the transcendent, not to give up on that, not to become a therapeutic center or a moralistic center, but focus on the transcendent and to exist upon, there's a definition there. Transcendent means to exist above and independent from, to rise above and surpass and succeed, and God is the only transcendent being, not to give up on that, to highlight that in worship and in our practice and talk with one another. One of the examples he uses of transcendent is the people who are caught in addiction. There are people who have been caught up dramatically in an overdependence on a physical thing. And one of the ways in which they get better is to call upon a higher power. It's a transcendent reality for those people. They experience it. And they know that they cannot overcome the addiction on their own by using their own power. They have to depend on something else which is beyond them. I would rather they use the word Jesus Christ instead of higher power, but this is what it is. And the second thing he emphasizes is to create a genuine serving ministry as opposed to searching for innovation and the lasting marketing techniques. He said the solution to this is not going to be found in techniques. It's going to be following in the direction of our God who is a servant, who ministers to us. First of all, starting in creation, most dramatically in sending us his Son, who also ministered to people, not using innovation or techniques, but on the genuine good news and love of God. Other directions, he talks about the importance of prayer, because prayer is a transcendent experience, and it's us reaching towards God and people beyond ourselves, particularly corporate prayer. And he calls to mind how prayer was such an integral part of Jesus' ministry. He needed time to pray for redirection and for spiritual strength. And Andrew Root talks about transformation as distinguished from change. He sees this not so much as a race to keep up with the increasing pace of change and keep on incorporating new techniques, but to see this as transformation in our ministry and in our own reliance on our transcendent communication with God and with one another. We all need to do some self-reflection. There are the crises about how can we pay our bills, how can we get people back coming to church, and where will our next pastor come from? Pastor Mohns is going to give us some interesting statistics, one of which I didn't know until I was talking to him the other day. They anticipate in 10 years, where's Pastor Mohns? Oh yeah, in the next 10 years, didn't you say we were anticipating 100 pastors will retire out of a pool of 200 pastors? It's interesting. And maybe we're going to have to talk away about sharing pastors. And yeah. And we can't just rely on retired old guys like me to serve part-time either, because we have physical disabilities that are taking us out of the mix, and we get tired, and we need more time off and so forth. Also, we have wives and children that bug us into really retiring, not just pretending. Yeah. Identifying what's important for your congregation and reason for being, and developing a roadmap and doing some strategic planning, which is really beyond the scope of what we want to talk about today. Today we're talking more or less about how we're going to cover off the pastoral vacancies that are coming up and how can we form partnerships with one another to help along with that. So that's about all I have to. Okay, we talked about short-term goals, and Pastor Mohns will give us some details about some of the pastoral shortages that are coming up and models that congregations can use to form partnerships with other congregations to try and meet this pastoral shortage in the future. So that's about all I had to present today, and kind of the observations I had about reading some stuff that Andrew Root has written. And maybe you have some questions or comments that you want to make about this whole general topic too. Ralph, you had some questions and comments. You're supposed to stimulate us.
Well, yeah. So a couple things. We're going to. I'll step in here shortly. Just to. There's a few things we still want to do in terms of, if you will, structure or next steps. But if you have any questions, Pastor Hilderman, now is the time. And the other thing, what I've done here, the reason we have this whiteboard, is if there is something that comes up that is maybe not as relevant to what you've said, but is important for us to capture. I'm calling it the parking lot. So we will park it here because my goal today is to keep everyone on track because we have a fairly full agenda and we want to make sure everyone's heard and stay on point. So if you do have anything, please let me know. I'll capture that. But again, as Pastor Hilderman just invited, do you have any other questions further to this very provoking and insightful and relevant topic? So here's your chance, please, before we move to the next section, if you have anything. Well, and I was waiting for them, but I do have a comment or a question. Okay. One thing that I found interesting that you had in your slide deck here was it's not about marketing. And yet I think what we need to do as a church is not market ourselves, but I think we have to be present. We have to think about how we appear. And so what you said about social media can be used effectively and well by churches and by individuals, or it could become a sinkhole that we lose ourselves in and just try, as you said, to get the likes and, can you see me now? Can you see me now? Mm-hmm. So do you have any thoughts or comments around what you may have seen or on that level? Again, not so much from a marketing the church, but are any of you using that effectively? Because I think that's just a good point for us to share. Maybe not do a deep dive here, but does that resonate for anyone? Yeah.
And some of those video hookups vary in quality. And they have to be easy for people to access, and the quality has to be good. One of the fellows who's really good at it, I think, is Pastor Bugbee, Robert Bugbee, and he puts out emails, and all you need to do is click on it, and you're there. Yeah. So. Well,
Roland, I want to just thank you, first of all, for your comment, because I think that is so important. The church that we now go to, we saw, everyone was shut down at one point, virtual, or you had limited numbers. And my wife was just saying the other Sunday, I was facilitating something for an organization, so I couldn't be there. But she said, there are all these people at our church. Most of them, I don't know who they are. And what we've seen is the number count go up. And I think what has happened, and I'll just throw my comments, and then this gentleman wanted to say something, is people that would never darken the door of a church, or there's a saying something along those lines, may have been now following for 2 or 3 years. Because I think what we have forgotten is that people have been afraid. They have been lonely. They are searching. Well, if you can click on and you can experience God virtually because you're experiencing Madonna and whoever else, or your favorite sports team or the Canucks on a little screen, why can't God use that? See, that's the part I don't get. I think God is not limited. I think we put our limitations on, well, God would never use that because look what else you can get there. So, yeah, you can. But I think the openness and the using it as a lever to open the door is very important. So thank you for your point. Well, this is a great question. Dave, what do you think? Should we make it look like we're all hip and happening?
Well, I don't think we want to misrepresent ourselves. I don't think we want to misrepresent. But one of the thoughts I had while we were talking about this is if people join in, even on a webcast, they're opting to come into a community. It may be an easier way for them to come into a community, but one of the things we're really up against is individualism. Has gone so far that people don't want to identify with a group anymore. And the churches are not the only ones that are up against this. Many community organizations and clubs too. John, I've even heard that it's hard to get younger people involved in golf clubs, and that there's experience. Is that true or not? Yeah, I belong to a fish and game log club, and we're experiencing the same thing. So part of this that plays into the individual corporate things.
Yeah, but folks, I'm going to throw something in the mix, and some of you may be familiar with a fellow by the name of Simon Sinek. He gained some popularity about 10 years ago. He has this concept, a book that he wrote called Start With Why. And there's he calls it the golden circle. He says you start with why, then how, and then what. And because, as you heard in my introduction, I do a lot of work in the corporate world, but also having been involved for, 35, 40 years in churches, both, as a deacon, elder, chair, facilitating these kinds of things. I kind of try to bring a bit of a balanced perspective here, because I think if we can look at some of the things that are attracting, if I can put it that way, the secular world, and it's not all bad, right? Let's just be clear for a moment, it's not all bad. So we need to look at this and say, what in this can we use? And the reason I bring up Simon Sinek, one of his he's got quite a following, and he's quite balanced, and I think has some great perspective and relevant for us here today. But more importantly, one of his last books talks about the infinite game. And I remember when I started reading that, I go, okay, where's God show up here? Because the infinite, right? I mean, well, Sinek's not a Christian, but we could take this, Dave, and say, and his point, and it's resonating with people, is think long game, not short game. Because so often, those of you that work for companies, there's the quarterly results and there's the metrics that we have to try to ring the bell every week or every month. Well, I think what we're talking about here today, and why you said I'm excited because I see, back to your point, the pendulum. I mean, what happens with a pendulum?
Goes back and forth.
Exactly. And I think we're still suffering from what I call a COVID hangover, because people maybe don't want to go golfing or do other things because we've been at home. But if we give them a reason to come out, and they see us online, and they might watch that service 2 or 3 times. When we don't have it online, you got a Sunday, and if they're in the pews, baby, good for you. And if they weren't, you missed them. Well, think of this, folks. We now have opportunity for the ripple effect. So I think what you're saying here is so important. The pendulum swings, but it'll come back. And I think we have to be ready for it. And that's what I'm excited about for today and what you're saying.
Yeah, I think there's some signs in Generation Z that are looking for, that are good signs about them coming back and looking for, looking for transcendent realities and principles to guide their life.
Yes.
And I think Pastor Mohns has some things to say about that as well.
So do you have any other questions? Because I do want to cap this at one point.
Okay.
And we want to do the introductions because we've skipped over that. We want to make sure. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Can you hear me there? Yeah. Social media can be quite fascinating. I guess there's the negative aspect of it in our society. But we actually at Mount Calvary, we have a situation where we are using Facebook advertising. We have a campaign going for the last year or so. And we're spending about $60 or $70 a month on advertising, and I don't know how it works, but we've had reasonable response from folks, and basically we're advertising our sermons. In New Westminster, we can't go and deliver flyers to apartments and stuff like that because it's not allowed. But we're getting response. We're getting some negative response as well. You know, folks that don't like churches, they'll send us a nasty email. But we've had several people that have attended our church because of this advertising. And so that's a positive aspect of social media. We're able to reach a lot of people that we wouldn't normally be able to contact.
Super. Thank you, sir. Okay, any other comments, any other questions for Pastor Hilderman? Or do you want to add anything else?
No.
Okay, well, let's give Dave a hand. Thank you very much. And I was really looking forward to this because, as you heard, Eric, Dave, and I have been sort of planning this, and when I saw this deck, I thought, right on point. So very exciting for what he shared, and it's very relevant, and obviously it's resonating with a number of you. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is I just want to add a couple of comments because I had a slot here where there was a few things I wanted to say, and it'll build on what you said, and it'll set up for Pastor Mohns as well. So you may have heard of this term, and if you haven't, then lucky you, you're hearing about it today. This is an acronym. It first came out, or the concept behind this, which I'll explain quickly here, probably developed in the last 15, 20 years. And it was identified, or it was framed with these 4 letters, which there's words attached to this, which I'll give you, that represent the reality of what we're living in, if you will, the times that we're in. And this is not in a Christian or religious setting. This is in the business or secular world. But it is as relevant, I believe. And so the V stands for volatile. So we live in a world that is volatile, and times that are volatile. Then uncertainty. Then complexity. And then ambiguity. I think that really describes the state of what we are living in and trying to lead through as leaders in churches and in our communities. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so I simply offer this as a backdrop for today for us to think about this as we're having our conversations. We're going to have breakout groups this afternoon, and this may be helpful to realize that this isn't just what the church is facing, my friends. Every organization that I work, and maybe the companies that some of you work for, right, if you're not in ministry and you have a day job, this is the stuff that you're going through. And it's just tougher. And as Dave said, you know, one of your slides, things aren't going to come back to normal, and we blame those people, right? That's one of those, well, if they would have just done this. My question is, who are they? We talk about them all the time, but I don't know who they are. But they're very convenient as a scapegoat and to blame them because they messed it up, and if they wouldn't have done that, we'd be okay. Well, I think they are us. So on that basis, then, I think we have an opportunity to move forward. So let's keep in mind that as we go through today, and we're going to be really looking at the issue, how do we address the pastor shortage, and with, as you already said, the people we have currently, but more importantly, where are we going? This is our reality. Now, how do we navigate through that? Ultimately, knowing that God is leading us. And Dave, you said that. We cannot forget that, because I think that is the thing. We can humanize this, and then we got to fix it and then we forget, well, where's God leading us? Right? And you talked about prayer, collective prayer, individual prayer, seeking Him. And I don't know, the God that I've worshiped for pretty much all my life, I see Him work. He doesn't always, it's not like instant coffee, right? I just don't boil the water, put it in, and it's ready. Sometimes He makes me wait, and sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes, you know, we take a bit of detour. And some of you are old enough to remember this slogan. Growing up, there was this company. It was a Greyhound bus company. You remember the slogan or the tagline they had? Go Greyhound and leave the driving to us. So go Greyhound, and they had this little jingle, and leave the driving to us. And years ago, I was sharing with Dave, we were just chatting before we started today, rather. The book of Proverbs for me has been a go-to book for decades, right? And I realized a long time ago that when I prayed for wisdom, God would answer. When I prayed for direction and clarity, but He wouldn't answer it the way that I expected Him to answer, nor the way that I wanted Him to. And but what resonated for me was, it's kind of like go Greyhound, but let God have the wheel, because you might have a much more interesting journey and see things you wouldn't have expected, made a few stops along the way. But His destination, or His route to the destination, I think is more important. So I throw that out today, folks, for us to think about as we live in this environment, as we try to navigate this and move forward. Okay, so I wanted to add that in. All right, so next we want to go to Pastor Mohns, we're moving things around a little bit. So if we can now make sure I'm not missing anything here. We've heard from Pastor Hilderman. So can we invite you up now, and there were a couple things you're going to tag together, and we'll hand it over to you.
So I'm Pastor Mohns. I'm your West Regional Pastor. Good to be here with you today. The subject that we're going to be focusing on is my lived 724 reality. So I pray it, I live it, and I work with all of you and have over the last 4 years. So I see a lot of familiar faces there. Well, the other day, I was visiting with some friends, and they had invited me over because they had bought this brand new fancy Jew oven with all the bells and whistles. It was Wi-Fi connected, and so they wanted to cook a meal and show me their new appliance. So we get there, points to the appliance, and on the screen there is this message that's there that says, "Updated turkey mode now available." And my friend, who has a very quick wit, said, "Even my smart oven knows that you're here." So, yes, you have your turkey mode of pastor representing Lutheran Church Canada as your Western Regional Pastor. I want to begin today, again, we talked about the importance of transcendence. I want to begin today, and hopefully we'll intersperse our conversations with Scripture as well. And I want to bring to our attention St. Paul's words concerning the church and describing this gift that God has given to us, this thing called the Holy Christian Church. And in the next chapter of Ephesians, he talks about this beautiful bride that the Lord has given. But in chapter 4, he writes these words concerning himself, but again giving us this beautiful description of the gift of church, in which he writes, "I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift." And then in verse 11 of this beautiful chapter, "And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ until we have all attained to the unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love." Adam and Eve enjoyed the perfect church. They were the last ones, the first and last ones to have that experience, to be the perfect church. And they departed from that. And in the fall, then, we still have the church, God's gift, an imperfect world, a broken world, broken people. And so I remember the Lord's words to his church, which I think we had in one of our gospel readings. "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few." And ever since Adam and Eve departed from that garden, that's been true. But we also know, as we've had all of these lessons before us in St. John's Revelation, of that church perfected once again. And that's the destination. And that's the reality that we are journeying towards. So I want to hold that up for you to say we live in this in-between time, between the time of God's creation of his perfect church and the time of that restoration of that perfect church. But we live in a time in between. To give some context then to this time, and in particular to get us thinking more broadly, to kind of set the groundwork, I want to just give you some data, some of the data that might be relevant to our conversations today. First of all, globally, we're reminded that God is on the move, and his church is on the move. So we remember in history how in the early church, the majority, 85% of Christians lived in the eastern part of the globe, around Turkey, and in those areas. We think of the Cappadocian Fathers and all of that. After 900, 85% of Christianity was located in Western Europe. And as the gospel moved and as God moved, Christianity then came to North America. And 85% of North America was the place for our generations have been known as Christian. So for the last 100 or 200 years, 85% of the North American population was considered to be Christian. What has happened in the last while here is that we've gone through a transition, a global transition. We might say a flattening or a leveling of the world in terms of Christian population. So in North America, where we were once 85% of the population, we are now 15% of the population. Okay. What's happened is the population of Christianity has moved to the south, so that in our day, 85%, there's a great leveling, that 85% to 15%. This is what we are experiencing. This is why we talk about volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity, is because of the great transition that we are going through, the great, what people have called the great leveling, so that Christianity is found approximately throughout the world in approximate identical populations. So we don't have this great mass of Christianity in one particular place, but it's spread almost equally throughout the entire globe. But for our reality, we feel it, right? Going from 85% of population to 15% of population in such a short period of time, that's going to cause volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. So that's the global perspective. Now, I've been asked to give you some of the specifics with regard both to national and in Western Canada. So in our synod, we have about 215 pastors. And in February, a report was given to the board of directors that over the next 10 years, we can expect 100 pastors will reach the age of 65. That doesn't mean they're going to retire, so I want to kind of correct that, because as we know, you retire, but you don't. You continue on. But at least 100 pastors will reach the age of 65 over the next 10 years. In the West region, we have 104 active clergy in the West region, 104. So if we think about the math here, we can expect a 30 to 50% of our clergy population will be over the age of 65. Okay, so that's a significant change. Then we're not saying that of those 65 they're going to disappear off the face of the earth, because they don't. They continue to work. We have, in our West region, we have 116 congregations. 36 are vacant, 11 are calling congregations. Those are kind of the raw statistics. What about what are our expectations from our seminaries to produce new candidates for ministry in the traditional residential ministry formation program? We are averaging about 2 candidates per year between the seminaries, 2 to 3 per year. And again, we live in a volatile time, so it's really hard to predict what that will look like. What we do know is that the models for pastoral formation are changing. If you ask the seminary, so what's your student population? Well, they will tell you, we can't really tell you that because there's not a traditional intake nor program for seminarians coming through our formative process. There are folks that are coming in various stages from various parts of the world who have some advanced standing. We have some candidates that are delaying their programs, so they might be in a, rather than in our traditional 4-year track, might take 4 or 5 years. Some of them are in our PAT program or in our colloquy program. So we are always trusting in the Lord to bring forth the fruits of the labors of our seminaries, who are trying to respond to the needs of our congregations. So that's kind of the situation that we are in. Currently, of the 36 congregations, only one is not being fully addressed with a regular Word and Sacrament pastor being able to supply the congregation. So we have in Western Canada 69 emeritus clergy. Okay, so retired pastors who are still, many of whom are still working, as you know, with our congregations. So we give thanks to God for this significant gift that He has given, that we have clergy whom He has provided health and energy and passion to be able to continue to serve the church in a number of different congregations. It's kind of frightening for us who are looking at retirement going, I think maybe it's just better to be in a congregation, because when I retire, I have 3 or 4 congregations that I'm looking at wanting to support. So we are really thankful for our emeritus, our retired pastors, but we also recognize that many of our, yes, let's appreciate our retired pastors, because we think without them, 36 congregations would not have the opportunity on a regular basis to hear God's word and to receive the sacraments. So, I mean, this is important work. We also recognize, however, that many of our pastors in that category have been in that category for 20 years or better, and as Pastor Hilderman has indicated, health is starting to catch up with them, and other things are catching up with them. So, what our retired pastors are saying to us is that we're going to have to deal with the situation just depending strictly as a strategy on retirement, on retired pastors is not going to be the long-term solution to the situation that is facing our congregations in Lutheran Church Canada. So we give thanks to God for those who are retired and continue to work, and those who are retiring, of those 100, that we pray that the Lord will enable them to continue to serve the church in their retirement for a number of years coming forward. Any questions on or comments? I am certainly open to conversations on that end at this particular point. So the challenges are real, and at times they seem very, very difficult. As your regional pastor, as I said, I spend most of my time, and sometimes if I really get kind of focused on this, I think of simply moving the deck chairs around in terms of pastors receiving calls and accepting calls and moving into other locations. And if you've ever, in kindergarten, my mom was a kindergarten teacher, and we had that game, musical chairs. Anybody had that? And in musical chairs, part of at least the experience that I had is that there would be a tune played and everybody would try and find a seat when the music was turned off. And as time went on, you reduced the number of chairs. And I kind of feel like this is the movement that we're experiencing in the church, that we are moving our pastors around, but the chairs are beginning to shrink. And so we're living in this reality of a shrinking congregations, shrinking resources in terms of pastors and the like. And we're going to move into that area then of models. This presentation that I'm going to share with you today is just a little bit of a sliver of a larger presentation. So I'm just going to focus on the topic that we've been asked to really address here and leave the other larger things to the side. But I just wanted to mention that you're not alone in your experience here. Throughout Lutheran Church Canada, what you're experiencing in the Lower Mainland is being experienced in all across Canada, in every circuit, among all of our congregations in Lutheran Church Canada. So you're not alone in that. And Lutheran Church Canada, over the last 2 years, has been at work developing a strategy. And some of you have been part of that consultation process, the results of which were presented at the National Convention in June. And so that strategy has been adopted, and beginning in 2023 will be implemented. So this conversation is helpful because it's the same conversation that has been ongoing within Lutheran Church Canada and within the leadership of Lutheran Church Canada for over 2 years, and a strategy is being developed in order to work through these together under a common umbrella. So you're not alone in all of this. And I'm going to leave that just as a piece of information. Those strategies, the information with regard to vision, goals, and the like are all found on the LCC website, and you can certainly look them up. I would encourage you, if you're doing strategic planning in your congregation, to look at the strategic plan of Lutheran Church Canada and see how you're part of that partnership and how we work together in addressing this situation. So models of ministry. I want to go back to historic models, first of all, of ministry, just in terms of how have we in the past addressed models of ministry, and I'm thinking here in particular of pastors. How did we address that? And so if you saw the presentation that was made at, or were part of the workshops, part of my work was to ask that question, historically, how were pastoral resources used in our past history? So in the past, congregations formed, especially in Lutheran Church Canada, through immigration. And immigration, we looked especially to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, of which we were a part of, to be able to provide, immigration happened with large groups of people from a particular area generally, in say Western Europe, Germany, or some other parts, and they were moved into communities or regions or areas, and then those particular communities of German Lutherans or different groups would look to the LCMS and say, hey, we have a group of people here that need a pastor. And so they would contact the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and so then they would ask for a pastor to be assigned. And so in general, in our eastern areas, that's what happened. Congregations would be developed, and pastors would be sent called, and those pastors were not just called as pastors, they were actually, the title was missionary pastor. And so those that were sent to Canada were identified as those who had a passion for and zeal for that missionary endeavor. So not only were they assigned to a particular community of Lutherans, but part of their work was to explore other surrounding areas to see where other groups of Lutherans were located, and so to start forming congregations as well. And so Pastor Ernst was one of our first assigned candidates to Lutheran Church Canada, and he was assigned to the area around Fisherville. And so that was a congregation he was assigned to serve. But over the next years, many other congregations were formed out of his work. And so some of them grew to such a size that they would then call a pastor, a resident pastor, to serve them because they'd grown to that particular size. And so that was one model that was used in terms of, how did we get pastors in Lutheran Church Canada. We also had a model of missionary at large, where we had a region that had a large population of people of immigration into that area. And so there was an understanding or an inkling that that the population was large enough that there was likely going to be groups of Lutheran immigrants from a Lutheran background. And so primarily the Minnesota district and the Dakota district were the ones then by that time that were responsible for assigning candidates. And part of that work was to assign, not to a particular congregation, but to a particular region, a missionary at large to explore and to gather up Lutherans, to catechize and to gather up into congregations Christians. And so in Western Canada, this was quite a familiar model that happened. Some of the survey work by Aberhart and others resulted in identifying communities where a missionary at large would be profitable for a missionary at large to be called by the district to serve in a particular region, to gather up people into congregations, and then later those congregations then would call pastors. But in Western Canada especially, the percentage of mission stations was approximately twice the size of congregations that were created. So these mission stations would come and go as populations changed and the like, and they would converge and gather together again. So it was a very fluid sort of scenario that the missionaries worked in, and part of that area was here in Vancouver. When we think about Bethlehem and the original work done there, there were how many attempts at starting a congregation in the Lower Mainland before the congregation of Bethlehem was actually established in a permanent way. 110 years ago, Bethlehem was established as a congregation, but it took many years prior to that and many attempts prior to that in order for that congregation to be established. So missionary at large was another model. A more recent model is one where a congregation of size said, hey, we identify another area of our region, our city or community, and we think that it would be good for us to be part of establishing another congregation in another location. And so congregations themselves would then become involved in establishing a congregation in another area. And so we have this kind of mother-daughter model of formation that happened. And pastors then would be called to serve as that child grew up and became able to be self-sufficient. So many of your congregations actually started in that manner, where you had a mother church in the Lower Mainland. Bethlehem was a mother church for many of the congregations, but many of the congregations also then became mother churches for others as well. And as growth happened, the church responded by being able to provide pastors to serve those congregations. But most of the congregations here actually developed into parishes, into dual tri-parish situations. That's the origin for much of the work that has been done, especially in Western Canada. So these models that we have, it's kind of like a going back to the future sort of understanding of models of ministry. But I just wanted to point out to you that there were these three different kinds of ways that pastors were dispersed into the communities to support the ministry. And then we're going to then move into what are the models that we have been talking about or thinking about. And that brings us then to dual or tri-parish models. So it's where two or three congregations which exist on their own but are served by one pastor whom they act together to call. So many of you are familiar with that kind of model. And the benefits of this model is we understand it. It's a certainty. It's something that we're familiar with, so it's not too hard to grasp that we could actually do this because we've done it in our past as part of our history. And so it's something that we can move into. And I think some of our congregations here in the Lower Mainland are actually thinking about this dual or tri-parish sort of model. So the benefits are that it's familiar. It can help to streamline the work of the church. If both parishes, for example, can streamline their constitutions to bring them into one sort of joint administrative board, so that you don't necessarily have to have two administrative boards, you don't have to have two treasurers, you don't have to have two everything, right? You can do that. So it helps to streamline, helps to relieve some of the pressures on overworked lay people in the congregation. So you can, and it also increases the possibility of the congregation's ability to employ a greater diversity of the gifts of God's people in a particular scenario. So the challenges are that in the past we're pretty independent. So the idea of joining together administrative boards and that sort of thing is not something that has gone over terribly well. A lot of our congregations want to maintain their own identity, and there are some good reasons for that as well. So it could be that what happens then is for the pastor in that situation is that it doubles his work, right? You have two congregations, but he has to attend meetings in both congregations. So administratively, his workload is just doubled. And that means a reduction in terms of the pastoral work that he was called to be a part of. So the other thing I think we're facing is that we have perhaps started as a dual parish, but we're realizing that even with two parishes, because of the costs that are developing, especially in this area with regard to real estate and all of the other costs, that even a 2-point parish is not sufficient to be able to sustain and stabilize the ministry. And so, the broader perspective is maybe we need to look at a tri-point with 3 congregations, or even multi-point. So we have the idea that maybe there could be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 congregations coming together, and this is another model of ministry, a multi-point model of ministry that is being considered in a number of different areas. In central Alberta, we're looking at that. We have congregations of that are consisted maybe 18, 20 members, and we need a lot of congregations then of that size in order to be able to sustain the ministry throughout. So we're looking at what is it that we can do in a multi-point parish situation, and what would that look like if we went to that kind of model. So one of the responses to that has been one congregation worshiping in various sites. So we have kind of like a satellite model where you have one particular congregation that is the kind of identified mother or main congregation, from which then the ministries are supported in all of the other outlying areas. And that kind of model really reflects that earlier model of a missionary being appointed to one congregation and then going out into the surrounding areas. So it's kind of going back to that kind of model where you have one congregation and then from there being able to support the various other smaller congregations. The advantage of that is that all of the congregations then receive word and sacrament ministry, and they can do things together that they couldn't otherwise do separately. So when you think about it, there may not be enough young people in one congregation, but if you had multi-congregations coming together, you could collectively form a youth group that could be supported in this model. You could do the same with Bible studies or Christian education, these sorts of things. So you can think about more of a regional model of ministry. So with every model, there, of course, are challenges and considerations. There's no one model that's perfect. Again, there's not going to be one perfect solution. That's not the goal. The goal is, again, to bring Christ and his gifts to God's people in the best way that we can. Okay, so we can also think about another model is a multi-point parish with more than one pastor. Coming together may provide an opportunity for congregations to not only have a pastor, but maybe a DPS and maybe other people working within that arrangement, so that you have a diversity of gifts and abilities that then can be used within the broader context of that sort of model of not getting away from the one pastor, one congregation. You might have a pastor DPS, you might have a director of outreach, all shared within one a parish agreement. This is another possibility that is out there. One of the things that we're looking at as well is where we have what we might call or identify as an anchor congregation, a larger congregation that has no need in and of itself to enter into or to consider other congregations. They could simply, they have no need to consider that. But as they take a look at the larger church and the needs, they're saying, well, we have the resources, we have the ability to be able to support other smaller communities of believers. And so there's again, the idea that in that case, some congregations see themselves as being able, within their own means, to support smaller congregations that are in need of pastoral services and the like. So there's a sharing, not out of need, but out of a sense of fellowship, of koinonia, of our joint responsibilities to care and support one another, and looking outside of their own box to say, hey, God has blessed us with resources and abilities and gifts, and we have a responsibility and a desire and a passion to be able to support our brothers and sisters who are located in other areas that we can be a part of. And so that's certainly a model that is also being employed in some scenarios as well. And it works well, but it doesn't always work. Again, sometimes the mother can be overbearing. And the smaller congregations who want to retain their identity feel like they're being just kind of tossed aside, right? That they're inconsequential, somebody else is doing the work, but we want to be involved in that. And so they feel threatened in terms of their own self-identity and that sort of thing. So it doesn't always work. Again, we need to work through some of the dynamics that are there. Sometimes it creates a sense of we're second-class citizens. And I've gone to congregations that are using this model, the smaller congregations, and that's one of the things that I hear more often is that we feel like we're being treated as second-class citizens. We're not part of that larger supermodel, and so we're an afterthought kind of thing, right? So the dynamics and how we create these models is really important. The model itself is only supportive, but it's how we relate to one another. Whatever model we use, we need, again, to have this picture of the church that St. Paul has given to us, and which is the model that our Lord has given to us as well. We have some situations in which we have a larger congregation who could use another worker, but who don't necessarily have the full resources in order to have that second worker. But joining with another congregation would provide for that need, which would be a benefit to both that congregation that's in that transitional sort of phase where they, in order to grow, they need to have another worker. And a congregation that's small doesn't need a full-time worker, maybe only needs a half-time worker. And so as these congregations look, they kind of line themselves up and say, well, this could work. A pastor or a worker, we could call a second worker into this scenario that would be a benefit to both the larger congregation that's going through transition and the smaller congregation that has a need. So that's another model of ministry. The other dialogue that we're having, again, is looking back to the future with regard to the use of missionary at large models, where the Synod would put into place a missionary to serve a particular region that's underserved, and there are not the resources available within that particular situation to be able to provide for the work that is there, that the Lord has given us to be about. And so that's another possibility as well in terms of a model of ministry going back to the future of deploying missionaries at large in particular situations that would be helpful for the support and sustenance of communities. And here I'm thinking in particular of situations in which congregations themselves have dissolved, but there's still Christians there, right? They just haven't been able to support a building, haven't been able to support a resident pastor, so they dissolve, but they're still there. So the question is, how does the church then provide for the needs of all of these people in a particular area that don't have a church building, don't have a resident pastor? How can we continue to support that? And so we think sometimes of our northern and also our southern areas where this is certainly becoming more and more of a reality, that we have families, maybe 2 or 3 families in a community or in a particular area, scattered geographically in a fairly large area, but still we want to support and encourage them in their Christian faith and walk with the Lord. And how do we do that? Well, this could be one of those models of ministry that we're looking at, the deployment of missionaries at large. Okay, I think on the chart that we have on the screens here, and these particular kinds of models are certainly posted on Lutheran Church Canada website. It'll be available to you here. But these are in terms of answering the question for the Lower Mainland. There may be an opportunity that one of these models really strikes your particular situation, and you can move forward into those kinds of discussions and considerations. There's not just one model that's going to fit every situation, but this is a beginning. This is a beginning of a conversation about models of ministry and implementation of these models, because we know that, again, the challenges of supporting the ministry of Word and Sacrament, the growth, the ability to be able to share our faith and to the world in which we live is certainly going to be there. And we want to be able to make use of the gifts that God has given to us in His church. Okay, some questions on these models of ministry. I've gone through them fairly quickly. Again, part of my work is to work individually with congregations and with circuits to look at strategies that address your particular concerns about support for ministry. It is possible, but it would be very difficult because we would be looking at, a wide pastor who would be deployed into a large region in and of itself, and would be on the road, doing that work, then to be able to sustain a congregation, a resident congregation. It is possible in some circumstances. I can see where the region is small enough and the resources are, or the locations are small enough that, say, if you're deployed to work with 20 families in a 100-mile, say, radius, right, and work out of a congregation that you're called to, it is possible. I don't think it's sustainable, and that's the question. Is that's again perhaps a transitional model, but it's probably not a sustainable model. Yeah, again, in an intensive metropolitan area, as we think about again that deployment of resources in a smaller area from a congregation, then we're looking at probably a different model than the missionary at large model. It would be good to have a connection to a congregation. Within the Lower Mainland, it wasn't too long ago that we actually tried to deploy a missionary at large model. That particular model didn't work very well. It gravitated towards actually having a missionary work out of Trinity, Richmond, in the end, identifying that as Pastor Paul Rogo, who was assigned that task. So it was something that we can learn from, and perhaps we can adjust.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in because we have 10, no, keep going. We have 10 minutes, so I'm just kind of saying that if you want to ask.
I'll turn it over to you to facilitate from here.
No, keep going. It's just, we want to do Q&A. I'm just saying to keep us on point because we have a lunch break and we'll come back. So we still have time, so please ask the questions. We're still good here for about 10 minutes. Over here, yep, okay. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, do we have any current models that are being deployed? Yeah, I think one model that comes to mind would be the Halifax model, where you have a missionary at large that is stationed in Halifax but works throughout Nova Scotia. And so that model has worked, but there are challenges to that too. Everybody wants their own worship service time. Now, they have deployed technology in order so the pastor rotates through each of the congregations, but the services then are transmitted to the other surrounding congregations that have formed. And so the pastor just continues to move along, but the services are being transmitted to the other points of the parish. So that's a particular model. Right now, I'm working with, in central Alberta, a model with a 4-point parish, Usona, Rimbey, Wetaskiwin, Camrose. And again, they're close enough together, so distance and region is not an issue. They're small enough. They're 20. Small can be a blessing too. But together, right now, there's a 2-point, Rimbey and Usona, but that's the resources aren't there to sustain or stabilize that ministry within that particular area. So they're saying, okay, Wetaskiwin is vacant, Camrose is vacant. We're close enough together that we can then bring together the four congregations into one parish. And again, the thought is to deploy some technology there with the idea that the pastor would be present in 3 of the locations, or 4 of the locations, and would just circulate through on a Sunday morning to cover the worship services. And then what they still have to work out is what administrative model, which is really, there are challenges there because all of them own property. Do you merge and how do you deal with the property issues in a merger, right? Those are some of the questions. CRA requires that each congregation has its own charitable number, and if you merger would likely require that one would give up their charitable identity. From a Lutheran Church Canada perspective, we discourage that because it's really hard these days to get a charitable number. At some point, the congregation's situations may change, and they may decide that they don't want to continue in this sort of arrangement. And then for the congregation that has lost its CRA identity, it's really hard for them to carry on. So we encourage, rather than a merger, a joint parish arrangement in which both congregations maintain their identity, their separate identities, their separate constitutions, but have a memorandum of understanding or some sort of agreement on how they will share pastoral resources and resources in general. Will they have one treasurer that does the work? Will they have one church council, or will it be just a representative council from each congregation that would come together and work together to keep the parish agreement in place? So there are issues that need to be worked out. It's not as simple as saying, "Oh, we'll just get together." There are a number of different factors that are there. Very good question. So those are again some models that are available to.
We have another question here.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Roland. We're just talking about one piece here. The broader picture includes many conversations in that area. There are ongoing movements towards addressing what does pastoral formation, missionary formation look like. Again, going back to that model of a pastor not just being a resident word and sacrament pastor, but a pastor being a missionary as well, that's looking outwards and addressing the community that they see and hear from, right? So this is just a very narrow part of a very much larger and broader thing that Lutheran Church Canada in particular is working at. So thank you for alerting us to that. And it certainly is part of the overall strategy for Lutheran Church Canada. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sonia. Sonia is part of our Regional Mission and Ministry Council. She represents lay representative on the Vancouver Island Circuit. Here, each particular circuit has a lay representation that, again, hears input from the congregations and requests and then acts. So where there is a possibility or an opening for work to be done, that can be addressed through your lay and pastoral representative. Pastor Lunderby, as circuit counselor, is your pastoral representative. Those are the kinds of conversations that have brought together this convocation as well. And so we're thankful as the Lutheran Church Canada that our Regional Mission and Ministry Council has said this is important. We will financially support the coming together of this group of people to talk about things that are really heart matters for us in our church and churches, and to see what we can do. Very good question. How does say a dual parish arrangement affect the work both for lay people and for the pastor? That's a great question. One of the concerns that we have in models here is the rising awareness of pastoral burnout and of lay leadership burnout as well. In the 4 years that I've been involved as your regional pastor, I've seen the burnout rate of our pastors increase significantly. So there is an awareness that we need to pay attention to the health of our pastors. COVID has been especially challenging because it has put a lot more work on pastors and lay people trying to figure out all the dynamics and cover all of the various things that are there. I mean, it's one thing to prepare a worship service for in-person, but it's an entirely other endeavor to put something online. And so right away, for every service, then you've doubled the workload of your pastor, or more than doubled, I would say. If you're like me, I would have to catch up with technology, first of all, before I could even get to the point that I could do that. And that's the same with our lay leadership as well, as we think about. So as we think about the parish model, dual parish model, those are specific questions. What is it that we could share to relieve, say, a lay leadership? You don't have to necessarily double your council because you have two congregations. Maybe there's some streamlining that needs to happen. Moving into this works in two ways. You can streamline your constitution, and that gives you the opportunity to simplify the work that you're doing, maybe even to say what's important to us and what needs to go to the side, right? Whatever model we're going to be using, there's no magic pill. There's going to be tremendous sacrifice that's going to happen. It will be painful. There's no getting around those two things as we deal with these areas, right? It will be a painful sort of thing. It may mean that we have to give up on some of our pet things in order to address what is core to the work of the church, which is the proclamation of the gospel of Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, right? So that may mean giving up on some of the things that we have held precious in our past, but maybe are weighing us down in our future. It may mean that we have to deal with some of the burdens of painful relationships that continue to impact the congregation and its health as well. We spend an awful lot of time, as was mentioned, in the blame game and all of these sorts of things that are part of our relationship life. We can work towards and commit to one another towards building healthy relationships with one another that release the potential of people to work collaboratively together towards the goal of proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's going to be painful because sometimes does that mean I have to let go of that anger or whatever that I have with and disappointments that I have with others or with the church or whatever? Yeah, that all of that is going to be part of how we move forward in our particular situation. With all of these challenges, though, there's always opportunities that are there. The challenges present us with opportunities, and whether it's in a shrinking environment or a complex environment, the church has spent most of its history in the very situation that we find ourselves in, so it's not an unfamiliar territory to us. But again, the church, as Pastor Hilderman has indicated, led by the Lord, has always found ways to be able to not only survive. I wouldn't classify, that's an attitude that we would have, but it's not an attitude that we necessarily need to have in terms of survival. It's an opportunity as well to deepen our relationship with the Lord and to work together towards a common goal. So sometimes the Lord works to take away to remove things that need to be removed. And we take that as decline and shrinkage, but perhaps it's the Lord's way of eliminating some of the distractions and things that are there in order for us to move forward and to, again, return to the core things that the Lord has called his church to be and to be about. And I think, so it depends on how you want to frame it. I don't personally see it. I have not seen among our church that idea, prevalent idea of survival. It is in the background, but what I hear in response to that is, but the Lord always provides opportunities. And I hear more and more congregations and circuits gathering together to say, in the midst of this, where is the Lord? We know he's at work. Where is the Lord? And how do we join with him in that partnership in the gospel? I see the changes that are happening among our young people. It's interesting that you mentioned that. Almost on a weekly basis, I get phone calls from young men, 20 to 35, who are saying, again, media saying, I have a real need for an authentic church. I've read the confessions of the Lutheran Church. I've gone through all of that. I am looking for a confessional, conservative, liturgical church. These are young people, 20. So again, it's kind of like back to the future. Yeah. And it is very much, again, the need for identifying something that is transcendent, not immanent, right? The need for something much larger than a particular structure, something that has eternal meaning and consequence. And they find that in the church, in Christ, in his word. They're looking for a church that will be there to support them in their learning and their catechesis. And one of the things globally that North America and in particular has been known for, and I think we need to lift this up, is we're a powerhouse of catechesis resources and information. Globally, we have the structure, we have the resources, we have the knowledge that doesn't exist in any other part of the world. And you're right, we could say, woe is me, but we could also say, look at what the Lord has blessed us with, and then how can we employ this? How can we deploy this? And so catechesis is really one of the strengths of the church in North America, and in particular of Lutheran Church Canada.
And I'm going to jump in on that note, cap it there, because that's exactly a perfect segue for the afternoon. Because what we're going to do, we're going to break out. And so, first of all, let's give Pastor a hand for his presentation. And before I ask Pastor Hilderman to say the prayer for our lunch break, just two things that I picked up on what you're saying. What I'm hearing is optimism. And I think back to that simple VUCA, it's just a framework, but what you've done is, against that backdrop, said, here's our reality. What I'm encouraged by, that I want to point back to you, that I hope you're hearing, is that the paradigms, and that's a great word for what we've been talking about, is what paradigms have we been working under? I think what God has done through the pandemic, certainly my perspective being involved in the church that we were involved, or we go to very involved, is I think he has forced us, or the pandemic, you can, however you want to look at it, is to deal with things that we have gotten very complacent about in the past. It made us move, or not move at all, I guess, actually. It made us stay, but that staying has made us reflect. And it is now causing, I think, an opportunity for reflection and for renewal and movement. And that's why we're here today, guys. This afternoon, we're going to get into that. We're going to, after lunch, we're going to come back, reconvene. I have a little framework that I'm going to share with you that I'd like you to take into the discussions to stimulate conversation. And then we're going to pray, and we're going to talk, and we're going to trust, because we know that God is present, and he is going to move through this. Yes. And then when you select the one or two or three things that you are going to tackle in the next hour, here's what I'm asking you to do. we tend to go to what is safe, the usual. Well, what do you guys do? Well, we kind of do this. And you can just tell by the way you talk, we're talking about what we're usually doing. And there's an old saying that you may have heard, if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll... Same results was Einstein. I probably messed up the quote, but you get the drift. So let's move out of that. And this, the creator of this little exercise said this is a fence. So think of this as a fence that we're going to try to kick down. So let's move out of this zone and then move to what is available. So think of this. You may not be doing it yet, but you know that we have available to us. It's a resource. It's a person. It's information. It's something that we're not using, but we know it's there. So can we move from the safe and move into the push zone? Well, let's push the fence a bit, or maybe let's knock it down and look at what else we could do. And then what these red dots represent are goals, or maybe ideas or strategies that when we move from the center and further out are things we can consider. And that's what I'm going to ask you to capture, and then come back when we break out, or after we've broken out, and come back and share what did you come up with? What do you think you can do? How can you approach this? And then if we really want to go out there, and I hope you do, is let's start thinking God-sized dreams, if I can put it that way. And what is the vision, or what do we know that our God is capable of doing and maybe wants to invite us in to do and be part of with him? So what would be something that you might put on the outer circle as a red dot that's extraordinary? What if you thought, well, I've thought about this, but I've never shared it with anyone? That's what I'm asking you to do now, either individually or collectively when we break into our groups. Think about what is possible, what potentially could be out there as you select the question or topics, if you choose more than one. And then on each table, we will provide you with poster-sized Post-it notes. So you can, there's pens there, and so what we hope you'll do is, as you take your topic or issue and make notes as to here's the issue, and then what we think we can do, or how we'd like to address that, just have somebody that has legible writing capture that, and then when we debrief, we'll come back and we'll just ask you to share. Also, what that does, it gives us a record of what we've talked about. We can get that typed up, and it can go into the minutes of today's meeting. Okay, so there's the topics, 5 people-ish per table. Move beyond the usual or the safe. Try to think into pushing it out a bit. What else is available? And then if we really want to risk it, what, from an extraordinary point of view, do we think we could be doing, or what might be the opportunities before us? Make sense? So now I invite you to exit. You've got about an hour. I'll be coming around and checking in with you. If you have any questions or things you want me to add, just give my shirt a tug and I'll get it on the list. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats again, please. We're going to get going here and move into the home stretch. Okay, so before we go into the hearing from you and you sharing your ideas and what you came up with, we've got a little fun thing we're going to do here, because it's really good if every event that we are at and that we leave, that there's maybe, if you will, a theme attached to it, or in marketing we would say like a tagline, right? And that's not a bad thing, right? So we're not necessarily coming up with a tagline, but maybe we can come up with what we'll refer to as a handle, so that when we go from today and look back on this, we can say, this led to us selecting a term or a title for today's session. So I don't have a drum kit here, Eric, but pretend you heard the drum roll. So here are your choices. So choice number 1, and you're going to think about this, and you're going to show by raising your hands which one you prefer. So do you want to have this day remembered thematically as there's an elephant in the room? Or, gets better, Fred, Back to the Future, or Perish. Ooh. There's an elephant in the room, Back to the Future, Perish, or Other. I think that's a really dumb one, quite frankly, you know. Other? Who wants other? Yeah. Okay, what's the other?
With God, nothing is impossible.
With God, nothing is impossible?
Tragic comedy.
Tragic comedy? Okay, hold on. Change is good. But you got to say it like Shrek for it really be good. Okay, so change is good. I don't know. Do you want change is good donkey? Do you want me to write that down? I think not. Okay, so with God, nothing is impossible, Pastor Miller, right? That's okay. So I won't write that down, but keep that. And what was yours, Fred? A comic tragedy. Okay, so we have 5 choices. So with God, nothing is impossible. Okay, well, you better put your hand up, or you can do. I give it 2 votes. Okay, a tragic comedy. Yeah. Thanks, Fred. Okay, there's an elephant in the room. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Back to the Future. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Parish or parish? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, okay, there you go. It's parish or parish. So, thank you. You have named this event. And, well, you can build on the theme here, right? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Let me push this back over here. And now we're going to ask or invite you and ask you to come up. So those of you that had the post-it notes, you can come up here and put her there. And then here's the mic, and what I'd ask you to do, because we want to capture this. So please be mindful when you're speaking to us that you're talking to this, that we all hear you, and it's recorded. And I think there's one group that is just going to speak to this, right? So there's nothing, which is fine, right? But we'll capture what you had. So who would like to come first? Share your wisdom and insights with the group. Number 1. Okay, well, let's do it logically. Group number 1, and then group number 2.
That works, because I'm also not using Post-it notes.
Okay,
So.
let's just do it like this. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, so our group talked about a few things. We talked kind of about each person that was sitting at our table, each congregation, and kind of a little bit about the health or where each congregation is at. And then we talked a bit about dual parish work, what works well, what are some of the challenges in that, and how that's difficult to maintain in a long-term way if you are looking at growth for your congregation. And so then we also started talking about the model of having, I don't know what to call it, like a missionary at large or somebody that's hired by our circuit that would do a few things. One, that could help with providing word and sacrament ministry to the vacant churches and supporting those churches at looking at what is their mission and outreach goals and what are they going to look at when they call a pastor. The other part of that position would be, which would be the biggest part, would be going and training and equipping lay people in each church to reach out to their communities. So talking with the congregations, looking at their community, what's the makeup around their church? We talked about how in Abbotsford there's a large East Indian population, or in Richmond there is a large immigrant population. So what are some of those outreach and events that we could do to reach the people around our churches? And so, so that would be the main thing, is looking at how can we work together with the congregations in this circuit to train and equip people to reach out into the community around them. And so we talked about, we would have to figure out how this position would be paid. So whether there's congregations in the circuit that can help fund this, whether that's something that could be done through LCC mission funding through the West region as a mission project, and then a couple other avenues of where those funds could come from, and then discussing how their time would be distributed as well. And then looking at not just trying it for a short term, but trying it for maybe 3 years, because it might take time for that to learn or to grow and for us to figure out what works well, what doesn't. But we saw this as a huge way of how we could look ahead and look at supporting and building our churches, and also supporting those who are vacant as well, with Word and Sacrament ministry, where there isn't a vacancy pastor that is able to maintain that for a long term. So looking at that way. So that's in summary of what we talked about. Thanks.
Need to speak into this so we capture.
We first of all considered the models, and Fred came up with the Australian-German model, and I'm going to let him explain it.
Steve Naylor pointed out that the Australian churches tend to work in cluster groups, 2, 3, 4, 5 congregations, which will share pastors and lay leadership, rotating amongst their congregations, but they sit down and organize their outreach, whether it's going to be a music festival, a block party, an event in the park. The German congregations do this as well in the SELK, 6, 7, 8 congregations, an entire circuit, also sharing music directors, people who do choirs, brass choirs, evangelism, and they'll plan what they're doing throughout their region, pastors rotating to some extent to cover vacancies. The other thing that happens, which I didn't mention, there are parsonages empty in Germany. So if a pastor is part-time or retired, for filling in a congregation, he gets the house. Just Sunday services, somebody else takes care of Bible studies. But this takes planning and time. The CELC also has something called Blütenlese, meaning the flower harvest. Different circuits put on a TV program service every week, and it rotates through the different circuits and regions of the German CELC denomination.
Okay.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So I'll do the rest of this page, and you can do this, what you wrote down, because by then I wasn't listening anymore. Okay. We thought the model has to shift a bit more in the directions of outreach in terms of serving the community. And then if you look at the downturn that we're experiencing currently, maybe that's an advantage because it's turning us more towards outreach and community. And having a family and community emphasis in our ministry is a definite advantage in that regard. Under the community or parish model, lay people will have to take more responsibility for their church, and outreach will rely more on word of mouth with the lay people that are involved, and learning how to teach and model one another. First of all, it needs that kind of an emphasis if we're going to go under the community model. We thought we could maybe learn something from the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons and the Jewish community as far as outreach and care. They have an admirable ability to maintain and care, first of all, for their own community. And then from that base community to reach out to others. And one of the examples that we thought was operating in one of our own churches that used that kind of a model was forming a book club and soup group, which was open to everybody. But it was a book study on a religious nature, but also the communal aspect around the meal and the soup. Regarding church property and challenges of maintenance, we asked just wanted to ask the question, are church buildings an idol? And renting out perhaps has been a godsend in order to meet our expenses because it increases our contact with other communities and other religious communities. And we talked about the halo effect This has been a topic that's been discussed in newspapers. Fred put us onto that in the Vancouver area, that wherever you have a church, there is a halo effect that is a positive influence on the surrounding community, because that building is not only used for Lutheran services, it's used for AA groups, it's used for ESL groups, it's used for Zumba classes, it's used for whatever, quilting groups and so forth. And one of the estimates was that for every dollar that's put into the collection plate to maintain the church, the community reaps tenfold from that, $10 worth of accommodations for other community groups. And we thought, I wonder if it would be worth it to promote online the halo effect of our congregation, and asking people in the community who want to contribute towards social good of the community to donate to the community, to the church, on the basis of the halo effect that the congregation is having in the community. In other words, they don't have to be members to donate, and they don't have to donate for specifically religious reasons. And regarding dwindling congregations, we put down dwindling congregations sometimes leads to dwindling enthusiasm, and it's the enthusiasm we probably have to address. So it's on to you.
Okay. So this part was to do with your church health and membership numbers and burnout and all that. We talked about volunteer burnout as lay people. We all know who you are in the congregations where you have that, the super volunteer that tends to unfortunately not be able to delegate and becomes burnt out, but it's because there isn't delegation, and it becomes a bit of a control thing versus, I guess, from the heart, really, is what that comes down to. Larger congregations looking appealing for volunteers where they don't have to do as much work. Where they can see another congregation close by that maybe they don't have to put so much effort in, and so why not move over there? And talking about clergy burnout, the clergy leaving the roster, and high expectations of clergy in general, as well as the young guys that are just coming out of the seminary. We talked about the lack of pastoral support, and kind of where would that come from? Is that congregation, church leadership, conflict resolution training for pastors and lay people, and training for the pastors dealing with personality disorders and the things that they're going to face when they actually meet the peoples in the pew and the issues that they're going to have personally. And then we got talking about, is your congregation open to change? And once we moved past smiling over that, it was like, do we have a choice? So the question was, is there a difference between change and transformation? Because transformation is a little less scary of a word than change. The fact about a facilitator, when there's something that does have to happen, or some big decisions that have to be made in the congregation, it really needs to be looked at that you bring someone from outside that doesn't have an emotional investment, and that can help you walk through that change rather than trying to deal with it just yourselves and with the same conflicts that haven't been resolved, which also comes back to getting a facilitator to help you with conflict resolution so that you can make that change a little better, and help with strategic planning, and the fact that change does not have to be massive. It can be little things. Sometimes maybe your congregation just needs to have a really nice greeter. maybe you just need to sit back and just have someone come from the outside and reflect, and you'll be like, hey, we're actually not doing so bad, and we can just do these few little things. Anyway, that was what we came up with.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm going to piggyback on what you just said about the anxiety. There's some of you may know of this pastor. He's originally Australian, or he's from Australia, and he's in the United States. His name is John Cuss, and he's written a book. I'm about halfway through it. It's called Leadership Anxiety, or Dealing with Leadership Anxiety. And it is obviously from a Christian perspective, but it's a really good book about anxiety. And I've been using excerpts from it in my workshops, and these are with my clients, so I don't say, here's a pastor, because then they probably would go, oh, I don't want to listen to it. But the concepts are timeless. And if you want to look them up, just Google cuss words. So John's got a sense of humor. His last name is Cuss, and his site is Cuss Words. So you can read what he has to say. And I watched a interview that he did with someone recently, and it's just fascinating. He's a very talented man and pastor and loves the Lord deeply. But he talks about the anxiety that we go through as leaders in congregations and just in general, and lays out very succinctly some of the issues or the triggers for anxiety, and then also gives some suggestions for how to deal with it, because we're all leaders in this room, and I deal with a lot of leaders as well, and what I often find, their anxieties get in the way of doing something. And so sometimes the first thing we have to do is help the leaders get to the point where they feel stronger, so they can start then dealing with the anxiety that is out in the pews or in the community. So I just wanted to link that in. So John Cuss, dealing with leadership anxiety. Okay.
We had a lot of conversation, and it was hard to capture exactly what our conversations were about, and maybe the other groups were in that kind of mode of thought as well. We were more engaged in conversation rather than in recording our learnings. But yeah, we looked at one particular model of congregation, and that was kind of a community focused, or having one congregation, for example, in the Lower Mainland, period. That there wouldn't be numerous congregations, but there would be one congregation in one location, with the possibility of satellite, making use of the existing satellite buildings for various ministries that would happen within the local community, but really having one church for the circuit and one pastor in charge or supervising the work within the circuit in this one congregation. But you would have numerous workers that would be involved, other administrators, and focus on small group meetings within the various locations, diversity. We talked about another model of a shared pastor, 2 to 3 congregations sharing one pastor, and utilizing the technology to serve all congregations equally, so that one wouldn't feel inferior to another, but that each would have the opportunity to have the pastor present within their community, their worshiping community, on a regular basis as well. We talked about next generation and what that means for the next generation of Christians within the Lower Mainland here, and the interest in community, the idea of gathering together, personally, not just out in the metaverse, but actually gathering together in person, and the need for that connection, that personal connection, in a safe environment, community, to explore and to grow in their faith and their love for the Lord, and their commitment to serve His ministry. We talked about again, the uniqueness of the Lutheran teaching with regard to the office of holy ministry, and how it's unique in that in the Lutheran doctrine of the office of ministry, it's the pastor who has that personal connection, who administrates word and sacrament to the individuals, not just in a corporate sense, but also in an individual sense, in the connection that builds there in terms of building both community but relationship within that community. And that's unique, led by the pastor. It's not found necessarily in other denominations. We talked about volunteer burnout, and how do you, in all of these models, how do you address that, whether it's administrators within a congregation, lay leaders within a congregation. In any of these models, how do you address that particular question? And our answer to that was really, if people are released to make use of their particular gifts and to serve with those gifts, then perhaps the level of burnout would be lessened, because you're working in an area that you're comfortable with, you have the gifts and abilities. It's when, as we were talking, asking a cook to do the books, you get a cookbook. Versus allowing a cook to be a cook and the finance person to be the finance person, there may be less burnout because you're working in an area that you have gifts and abilities, desire and passion, and it just is a reaffirming cycle that can happen there. So the question, we also asked the question of, are we open to change? And actually we said, you know, it's a good question, but it's a question that we've never asked. Maybe as one of the other groups have said, it'll become obvious one way or the other in the future. But I think it's a good point that maybe as congregations and leadership to ask that question, how open to change is the congregation? What's their tolerance for sacrifice and pain? What are they willing to risk in terms of this circle here? Where are we in that? It's a conversation that we thought would be extremely important for our congregations to begin asking and to speak about. We had said it's on everybody's minds, but we've never verbalized it. And so that was a challenge to say maybe we need, as congregations, to verbalize that question and to talk about it. And maybe to do it sooner rather than later, sooner than what maybe we would be forced in terms of necessity. Perhaps when there's not a crisis, that we could have a more common and respected conversation with regard to that particular question. So those are the points I think we covered. Okay.
All right. You just made an interesting comment that made me think of something. Maybe the subtext to the tagline is perish or perish, change or be changed. All right, because I'm going to add this in because, again, you know, one of the things I will share with you folks is that the work that I do, change is no longer optional. You've made it clear we have to. But it's a matter of what the force or factors are that changes us. And if we walk into it and we're open to it, if it's a calling, which I believe within the context of the church and our faith it is, and if we don't, we're going to be changed. But it just depends on how we enter it. So I think you raised a really good point there. Thank you.
We talked a little bit about the aspect of burnout within congregations. The same leaders tend to be in their positions for a long period of time. I guess I've been chair for 30 years now at Trinity, sort of on and off. And I have to firstly let go, but also find people that are willing to step in and take on that role. So it's kind of two problems, but I'm part of it. The other thing that Pastor Neitzel shared with us is it was a symposium or something that he was a part of or heard about. And in the church, was it in the U.S., Pastor? Yeah. So 40% of the people kind of know what's going on in the church, but 60% don't know. And that in itself is a problem. And I think about actually within Lutheran Church Canada, how many of you subscribe to Info Digest? Show of hands. Okay, maybe a third. Info Digest is a weekly publication put out by Lutheran Church Canada that contains a whole bunch of sermons from across Canada, the whole strategic plan that Lutheran Church Canada went through, things that are happening in each region, and that's published every week. And all you got to do is go to the website and sign up, and you get it automatically every Thursday. And only a third of us get that. So that in itself is a problem. Out of the 60,000 people in Lutheran Church Canada, the distribution of that email is 1,800. And that is sad. That is our only national publication that comes out on a regular weekly basis. So there's one way that we can improve right there. All of you sign up and encourage your congregational members to sign up and actually hear what's going on, what is happening in the other regions. I digress, sorry. What else here? Sunday school, try to, well, we have a Sunday school going, I'm not sure what the point was there for Sunday school. It's the usual way to do things, I guess. That's what we were saying. And maybe we have to look at other things that we can do. I know at Trinity we had a Thursday morning moms and tots drop-in for the community. And that actually worked quite well. And when the small kids reached the age they had to go to preschool, it was the parents that said, well, don't you have a preschool? And we said, well, no, but they said, well, we really like it here. We want to bring our kids here. Why don't you have a preschool? And so it took us a year or 2 years, and we finally put a preschool together. So now we have 35 kids every day from the community. And so it was just another way to reach out. Small groups was the one that we talked about quite a bit. And it's certainly something that can be done, but it has to be done strategically. There has to be a plan around it. It can't just happen by itself to say, okay, let's get together in small groups. You know, what is the purpose of the group? Does it have a function? Are you inviting others into the group to participate? Because just having 5 people meet every week for the rest of their lives isn't going to do anything. It's not going to change anything. So you need to invite people into those groups to make them important and adding to your ministry. The extraordinary is to challenge individuals to share their faith with others. That's probably the biggest struggle that we have within the church is an unwillingness to speak our faith. And we have to encourage people to do that. In fact, in Info Digest, there is a section called Young Old Lutherans where they're encouraging younger Lutherans to share their faith. Why are they active in the church? And it's interesting to read those things and see what people have to say from across Canada. What else we got here? I guess the point is we have to be open to change and willing to look at what the opportunities are and try to embrace them and move forward strategically. I think I've said enough. Thank you.
So we had representatives from Our Savior, White Rock Faith, St. Paul, Trinity, and one retired unaffiliated but often affiliated pastor with us. We had good conversations. And both Paul and I have been nominated to present today because this is probably the issue most dear to both of our hearts because before this whole thing even started, St. Paul and Trinity were looking to do something together with respect to the whole concept of we're losing our pastor. How do we go about getting a new pastor? And we had talked to Pastor Mohns about, you know, the likelihood of getting a pastor into the Lower Mainland. It didn't look good. We're struggling for different reasons. And anyway, we decided we were going to start getting together, and we met. and it was wonderful. And I will let you I'll let Paul give his side of the story on that particular one.
All right. You got to take the microphone, please, so we can hear you. Yeah, pull it out.
Yeah. Eric came to our church probably about 6 weeks ago, had a meeting with Pastor and myself, and it's something we had been talking about, a certain group, Donna in the group spearheading it. It's called a Future Focus Committee. And Pastor had already told us, Lenderby, 6 months to a year ago, that he's going to retire in the next year, so we just wanted to be prepared. And as we were having these discussions, Eric came to our church, we talked, and I thought, you know what, this is the perfect time for us to talk about our future. And we had our first meeting, Trinity and Abbotsford's council and our council and our Future Focus Committee a couple weeks ago. We have another one here in a week, but I think after the meeting, talking about several stuff here and going ahead, a lot of us were this morning, like I could see some discouragement, and that was me too. I think each of us have it in our head, but after we collectively got together as congregations and as councils, we feel energized after our first meeting going forward. Like even after today, my glass is getting filled up again when I leave this meeting because of what we're talking about. And going forward, we did look at all the models. I think for us it would be the dual parish, but there's a lot of things to look at, and a lot of the stuff we talked about was already talked about before we got up here. But yeah.
Can you read my writing?
Yeah, you go ahead, Eric.
Okay, just a little bit further. Yeah, so we had talked about a dual parish for the two of us. That was the primary thing, but we thought we'd like to hear what other models were out there. And Group 1 actually came up with a really good suggestion that to overlay everything with respect to a missionary at large might be an issue, something I had never thought of until the discussions in the group that we had, and then you came forward with that. I think that's another thing we should look at, Paul. You know, an overlay of having a missionary over the missionary at large over the region to help, you know, our circumstance out. One of the biggest issues I think we need to do is definitely decide on the roles that the pastor will play, what the lay people will play, what any church worker we decide, because there's a good option we might have a pastor that we call together, but we'll probably call a church worker together maybe as well. And what are their roles, and what's the role of the lay people? Something else came up was the role of the elders. And in the old model, elders really helped out the pastor a lot with respect to you know, the pastoral duties and helping him out. And should we go back to that kind of model again, whereby we help out, you know, pastor in that role model with respect to visitations, for example? One of the issues came up was, well, elders always used to be these guys, right? They were always men, right? How about the concept of having, you know, husband and wife going out and doing visitations and those kinds of things? I think there's great value in that, especially for some areas that are sensitive to either sex. So might be good. One of the biggest issues that I think we need to resolve is the thing about the issue of governance. At the end of Pastor Mohns' talk, he was asked a question and he responded, "Oh yeah, you gotta think about your constitutions, and you gotta think about your charitable status, and you gotta think about all those kinds of things." Well, above and beyond that, we've got, and he suggested perhaps what you don't need to do is have a common constitution and change your charitable status of one of the ones because of the risks of that. So go along the lines of, you know, an MOU, memo of understanding. And I think we're sort of agreed on that. You and I will talk with our councils next week as to see whether or not maybe that might be the best approach, just leave things the way they are with respect to our two churches and trying to adopt a dual parish scenario. Anyway, and the other thing is, how are we going to share our resources? How are we going to share our costs? And man, that went et cetera, all the way, because there's so many points that you need to go down the road to come to some kind of agreement of understanding. And the last thing on our list was the housing issue. And we talked about perhaps, to try to encourage someone to come out to the Lower Mainland to serve our parish. That'd be one thing, but what we're hearing from Pastor Mohns and others is that there's not too many pastors willing to come out here, given the state of real estate out right now. So why not consider building a a parish house home for the pastor? And we went through some of the pros and cons on that. Options are to maybe build that house, maybe provide an allowance, find out some way, but we need to find some way of encouraging someone to come into this particular area of the country, which is probably a little bit more expensive than most elsewhere. So we need to come up with those. So at least now I feel really comfortable coming together again with St. Paul's and Trinity's Council with a lot more clear idea of what questions we need to answer. Thank you.
We've got had a tailwind here, so we've got about 15 minutes ahead of schedule. And what I'll do at this point is just open it up for discussion. And it's not that we have to go down a specific path, but you've heard a lot of ideas here and different perspectives from the 5 groups. Coming back to this little model that I suggested you may want to use as a framework, and I love what a couple of you referred to this, okay, well, the usual, here's what we always do. And what I heard that was encouraging is that you started examining, kind of knocking the fences down or stepping over the fence a little bit and saying, well, what if we that, and what about that? So there's 3 questions I always ask groups that I work with as it relates to these kinds of activities or events. And the first question is what? The second one is so what? And then the third is now what? So I think what we've done today, we've looked at a lot of the what's. And so I'm just we have, as I say, a bit of time here. Is there anything else? Are there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you feel we should? And to that degree, what I will do is first make sure I'm not knocking anything over, including my head. And come back here to the parking lot. And do we capture anything else? I introduced this concept this morning, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Are there any other what's that, is there anything else we need to get on this list here that needs to be carried forward as an issue of what we need to think about and what we need to do, which then opens the door for the discussion of so what? So what do we do? Or even so what? You shrug your shoulders, right? Because that's another response to that, because some things you look at and you go, it's kind of down the list, it's not a priority. And then the now what? And my suggestion to you, my friends, today is that as we leave here in about a half an hour, that if there's anything else we need to discuss now, anything else you'd like me to capture on the parking lot, anything else that someone would like to say or ask, that we use the remaining time to do that. And then, I've got a few closing comments I'll make, and then Pastor Hilderman, I think, are you closing in prayer for us? Or, yeah, okay, so that's where we'll end up. And so there you go, opening it up. Are there any other questions, anything else beyond what we have on the parking lot here? Technology, streaming, develop a strategy by each church or on the basis of each church. Share best practices, which I think happened a little bit here already in the the discussion, right? You were kind of, here's what we're doing, or here's some ideas. Training pastors to be missionaries and evangelists, that ended up on the list. Is there anything else you'd like me to add? Yes. Okay. Anything else? Yes. Okay? Create a solution to finance pastoral homes, okay? Okay, so what I'm writing down here, that's a great idea, support services and staff. And I think all of us have unique giftings and talents, and some of you may have done personality assessments, right? Or even, there's one that's quite popular, is from the Gallup, the people that survey everyone, the Strengths Finder. You may have heard of that. Maybe if you work for a company, a lot of companies use those. But what I use them a lot because what I find, in both within settings of, you can work in a church or in a business or just in life, it's great for coaching people from a career path. We have all been given unique talents and abilities. And I don't think we talk about that enough in the church. And we end up getting the round peg in the square hole. And I think part of the reason, and guys, I've been involved in churches for a long time and I've seen this. I've got to the point where I got burnout and I just stepped back and I said, nah, I'm done for now. I had my seasons. And I think part of it was because other people don't step up, so you step in, you take this on, then you take that on. And if you have just imagine a knapsack. So I got a brick, I put a brick in. You don't want to carry your brick, give me your brick, I'll carry it. Before you know it, we got people in the church walking around like this, including pastors. We got to start taking some bricks out of their knapsack and let them walk straight and play to their strengths. And we have the ability now to assess, and I really believe, and I encourage you to do this, play from people's strengths, right? And I know within even the Christian community, there are some really good tools that we can use to help people find their strengths and then put them where they should be based on the strengths. So you're raising a really good point. Let's not burden people, because that's the road to burnout. Okay, so I'm going to write down here, define steps required. Okay, so we've got it on the list, and then again, from a follow-up point of view, you guys can decide how you want to tackle that. Okay?
That's part of the so what, isn't it?
Yeah, that is part of the so what. What? Yeah, so let me just write that on here, because there's what, so what, and then now what. And what we're really good at for the most part is saying, here's what we should do. This is, and so what that means, so what that looks like. And we're not always that good on the now what, right? Because that means someone actually has to do something. It goes back to finding the person that is maybe best suited for that or passionate about it. And then not just saying, there you go, Phil, give them all the bricks to carry, give them support, right? Because we're really good at sending people out alone to do stuff. And that's not, I don't know, that's not what I read in the Bible, right? We're to work together, bear each other's burdens, plus also work together to do what we're called to do.
Think of a couple things. One of them, even as I try to get my head around this person to help out with the circuit, I can only think of that maybe working at the circuit works. So I would think about this. If we could get the circuit together to do some exciting things. The problem when you say
the circuits together is we share the holiday services, so we would have literally the whole South Island, all the pastors all get together at one church. So we could say Sydney was going to be the first Advent service, or then we'd have an Easter service in Duncan, and we'd have another service in Kilburn, and we'd have a service. Everybody traveling.
And one more suggestion, film those, post them. Because the thing that we have a glorious opportunity to do now is people start coming back. When we do reach out, right, we start connecting again, capture that and post it. And then somebody can come and watch and go, yeah, I heard there was that. I didn't go. It probably was boring. And they start watching and go, dang, that was good. I should have gone. So let's use technology to promote what we're doing, capture what we've done, create a record, a video record of that, post it, and then people can see, they get a sense of what this is. And then to your point, do it well. The thing that has frustrated me over the years in the church has been, it's like junk for Jesus, right? Well, I don't want my couch, I'll give it to the church for the youth group. I mean, I don't know if that resonates for you guys, but it's kind of like, I always think whenever I've been involved, let's do our best. He deserves the best we can do, both in terms of quality and talent and passion, right? So let's bring our A game to the table and not just kind of, well, he'll do it, he's always done it, it's okay, but not that great. No, let's raise the bar, because again, I think coming out of COVID, people they want to be re-engaged, but they want to be re-engaged with quality, They don't just want just something that's posted there and they'll say, oh, that's from a church, it's no good. Thank you. I'm just going to leverage off of what you said, and I'm going to bracket this little section here. What I found in the last 10 years, because I do a lot of work with young professionals between age 25, 35 to 40, and I was, James and I were talking, right, when the breakouts, and I was saying to him, you know, what I find, there's a real appetite. They want to connect with the old guys. Because I've bounced it off some people, say, well, I'm older, and they go, oh no, well, we want to talk to you, but it's how I approach them. And a lot of what I've been doing, particularly in the last several years, in one sector that I do some work in, I've been talking about the need for mentors. And we need it in industry, but you know what? We need mentors in the church. We need to have senior men and women that have gone the path already, that have some cuts and bruises, which represent metaphorically experience in life, challenges, and in trusting in God and seeing Him be faithful, to step up with young people and say, yeah, that is tough, isn't it? Or the hand on the shoulder, to mentor, to coach, and to teach. They are craving that. And my friends, if we don't do it, if we just leave it to them and go, well, they're all on their phones and their devices, we can't connect with them. If we don't reach out, they're going to stay on their phones and devices. So let's figure out how to connect with them so we can create moments for learning and teaching. I think that's so important, and I'm not hearing that being talked about enough. And so I've certainly put my hand up a number of years ago, and I'm starting to push that. And that what I find is people are responding, going, yeah, well, I was thinking that. And here's what's always funny. When you finally say something, and then people go, well, you know, I was thinking that, but I thought I was the only one that was kind of had that idea, so I didn't say anything. My sense is there's a lot of people out there thinking the same stuff, and if we can start talking about it, we may actually have some momentum to start doing something. So I throw that out for your consideration as well. Yes. This is a little model I developed a couple of years ago, and I'm going to leave you with this. If you think of the phases of life we go through, right? Each of these S curves represents, could be a decade, it could be a phase in life, it could be a phase in the church. As we transition over, and we need to, otherwise what ends up happening is something like this, and then we usually have this slow decline. But this S curve, moving from one level to another, and this is what as I was reflecting on today, and I was talking to Eric and Dave as we were preparing, I thought, what I want to leave you with is, you are at a point right now, it's not the good one to use, where you're going to have to figure out, the D stands for drop. So as you transition from the who we are or who we were, if you can put it that way, to who we're going to become, as you now start up the next S curve, you start moving up, we need to look at, and I think you've got a lot of ideas today about what you're going to keep. So I'll write it in. So first one is drop, next one is keep, and here's what I'm going to encourage you to do, is think about, out of this list and the other things we talked about today, what are we adding and what are we acting on? And this drop doesn't mean you stop doing it, although sometimes it does, but it often means delegate, teach others, bring others on board so that you don't have to carry those bricks. Keep the best, what's rich and full and is feeding you and others. And then don't be afraid to change and to step up, because if we don't add something, you don't experience the lift of that next phase. And I think you as a group here, the leaders that are gathered here today, the pastors and the lay people, my hope and prayer for you is that you can get clarity from today to know, what do we stop doing or put to the side, and it's not a priority anymore. What are our core deliverables, if I can put it that way for a moment? But then really importantly, where are we going? Like, let's make sure we know what we have to add, and let's start moving in that way. Okay, so I'm going to ask Dave, but before I do, say thank you very much for letting me be here today. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to facilitate, and I wish you God's blessing as you guys move forward.
And I think we should give Ralph a hand for giving up his time to come here today and being with us. Thank you very much for your facilitation. Yeah. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise for all your goodness to us, but for the goodness that you delivered us today, especially through this assembly. And we thank you for calling us together. If it wasn't for your Son, Jesus Christ, maybe we would never have met each other. But here we are, gathered together in his name, and you have graced us with your presence. We ask your blessing now as we go home. not only for safe travel, but that we may incorporate these good ideas which we shared with one another and the love which we shared with one another and transplant them in our own congregations and parishes and learn to gain from each other as a community grounded in you, in your Son, Jesus Christ. We pray this in your Son's name, who taught us all to pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.